Mornings in Asheville used to mean the smell of sawdust and black coffee. I'd wake before sunrise, pull on my flannel shirt, and sit on the back porch watching the Blue Ridge Mountains slowly appear through the morning mist. Carol always said I was in love with that view more than I was with her. She was wrong, of course, but I never argued the point. That was 32 years of marriage. That was my life until the cancer took her 4 years ago and left me rattling around a house I'd built with my own 2 hands. My name is Walter Greer. I'm 68 years old. I was a carpenter for 40 years, then ran my own contracting business until my knees told me it was time to stop. The house on Ridgecrest Road wasn't big, just over 2,000 square feet with a wraparound porch and a workshop out back that I'd added myself board by board. It wasn't much to look at from the street, but every corner of it held something. The oak banister I'd turned on a lathe the winter my son Ryan was born. The kitchen window seat where Carol used to read on Sunday mornings. The workshop where Ryan and I built his first bookshelf when he was 12 and called himself a craftsman after gluing 2 boards crooked. Ryan was 37 and worked in Charlotte as a software architect. Smart kid. Always had been. He took after his mother in the way he thought things through quietly before he spoke, and he took after me in the way he never walked away from something unfinished. After Carol died, he drove up every other weekend without being asked. He'd sit with me in the workshop and pretend to help while I explained what I was doing. He didn't have the hands for woodworking, never did, but he showed up every time. That meant more than any finished joint. 3 years ago, Ryan told me about Cassandra. He was nervous in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, talking too fast and watching my face for a reaction. She's a life coach, he said. She has her own online program and a pretty big following. She's different, Dad. She really sees things. I smiled and told him I couldn't wait to meet her. I remember the first dinner clearly. Cassandra arrived 40 minutes late in a cream-colored linen dress and apologized in a way that didn't sound like an apology. She was attractive, mid-30s, with a practiced warmth that lit up when she needed it to and switched off when she thought no one was watching. She asked me about the house, about what it was worth, about whether the land behind the workshop was mine or the county's. I told her it was mine. She nodded slowly, the way you nod when you're filing something away for later. Ryan glowed all through dinner. I ate my pot roast and kept my thoughts to myself. They were married 8 months later in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Hendersonville. Ryan looked happier than I had seen him in years. I gave them a generous check, shook my son's hand and hugged him longer than usual. Cassandra pecked my cheek and thanked me for the gift before I could finish saying it was my pleasure. The plan was that they'd buy their own place in Charlotte. That was always the plan. But within a month, Cassandra had found reasons why Ridgecrest Road made more sense. Ryan traveled for work. Cassandra worked from home and needed peace and quiet for her online sessions. The housing market in Charlotte was brutal. Besides, she said, it was important for the family to stay close. I said yes because Ryan wanted me to say yes. They moved in on a Saturday in September. Cassandra brought 6 oversized boxes of things that had no clear category. Crystals, essential oil diffusers, silk tapestries in shades of rust and sage that she hung over the walls. Carol had painted butter yellow. The smell of the house changed within 2 weeks. By the 3rd week, I had started spending most of my time in the workshop. It was never anything loud. That was the thing about Cassandra. She was too smart for loud. It was the tilt of her head when I reached for the remote, the way she scheduled her online sessions right when I had always watched the evening news, the comments over dinner, gentle and smiling, about how older men sometimes struggled to adapt when their routines were disrupted. She said this directly to Ryan once, not even lowering her voice, as if I weren't sitting 3 feet away. Ryan noticed. I could see him noticing. He started asking me more often if I was all right, not in the casual way you ask when you already know the answer, in the careful way you ask when you're afraid of what the answer might be. I always told him I was fine. I didn't want to put him in the middle of something. He loved her, and she was his wife, and I told myself that was what mattered. About a year after they moved in, I made a decision that felt like the right thing to do. I signed the house over to Ryan, with the condition that I retained the right to live there for the rest of my life. It was my gift to my son. The house should belong to the young, I told him. He hugged me in the driveway and didn't let go for a long time. Cassandra's reaction was warm and perfectly composed. She thanked me, squeezed my hand, and that evening I heard her on the phone in the bedroom saying something about timelines and about patience finally paying off. I stood in the hallway for a moment and then walked back to the workshop. The months after the transfer were quieter in all the wrong ways. Ryan worked longer hours. Cassandra traveled more for her wellness retreats, coming home with new vocabulary and new demands on how the household should run. I noticed the tension between them growing like weather moving in, slow and unmistakable. Ryan stopped mentioning her name the way he used to, with that particular brightness. He mentioned her less and less. Then one Tuesday morning in February, my phone rang at 6:47 a.m. It was Ryan's manager. There had been an incident at the office the previous evening. Ryan had collapsed at his desk. They had called an ambulance immediately, but by the time the paramedics arrived, his heart had already stopped. He was 37 years old and had never once complained of chest pain. I won't try to describe the days after that. There are no words for burying your child. You go through the motions. You stand where people put you. You speak when someone asks you a direct question. Cassandra wore black from the moment of the phone call and handled every logistical detail with an efficiency that I found difficult to watch. She greeted the guests at the reception with quiet dignity. She spoke about Ryan in the past tense without stumbling. She didn't cry, at least not that I saw. I sat in the corner of my own living room, surrounded by people who kept telling me Ryan had been a wonderful man and waited for it to be over. 6 days after the funeral, Cassandra knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it and she walked past me and stood in the center of the room with her arms crossed. She scanned the bookshelves, the photos on the dresser, the workshop blueprints rolled up in the corner. "Walter," she said, "this is a difficult conversation, but it needs to happen. Now that Ryan is gone, the house passes to me. That's how it works. And I think it would be best for both of us if you found somewhere more suitable to your situation. There are some lovely retirement communities outside of Weaverville. I've already looked into a few options." I stood very still. I told her about the life estate. I told her the agreement had been a legal condition of the original transfer, that my right to remain in that house had been documented and notarized. She smiled in the way she sometimes smiled when she thought I was being slow. She had spoken to a lawyer already, she said. Life estates were complicated. I was welcome to consult an attorney of my own, but litigation was expensive and stressful for someone my age, and she could make things here very uncomfortable while we waited for a court to sort it out. She thought 2 weeks was a reasonable amount of time to begin the moving process. Then she turned and walked out. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the room I had built. The windowsill I had fitted myself. The closet door I had rehung twice before it sat perfectly level. I looked at Carol's photograph on the nightstand, and I looked at the photo of Ryan at his college graduation, holding his diploma with both hands and squinting into the sun. I did not sleep that night. I lay on my back and thought about the last few months of my son's life, the way he had seemed distracted in October, the Sunday afternoon in November when we sat in the workshop and he picked up a chisel and turned it over in his hands for a long time without saying anything. Finally, he said, "Dad, do you ever regret trusting someone you shouldn't have?" I asked him what he meant. He set the chisel down and said, "Never mind. It's nothing. I'm just tired." The morning after Cassandra's visit, I started gathering the things that mattered most to me. Not to leave. I had no intention of leaving. But because something about the way Cassandra had looked at my belongings made me uneasy in a specific way I couldn't name, I pulled out the lockbox from the back of my closet where I kept Carol's rings and the deed paperwork, and when I lifted it, I saw something beneath it that stopped me completely. A sealed envelope, my name on the front in Ryan's handwriting. Below it, in smaller letters, Open if you ever need to. My hands shook through the whole process of opening it. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and a business card. "Dad," Ryan had written, "I hope you never have to read this. But if you do, it means things went the way I was afraid they might. Call Frank Alderman. He's been holding something for me. He'll explain everything. I love you more than I've ever known how to say. Ryan." Frank Alderman had been our family attorney since before Ryan was born. He'd helped Carol and me with the original deed on Ridgecrest Road, handled the paperwork when I set up my contracting business, and sent flowers when Carol died. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years. He answered on the second ring. "Walter." His voice was steady and careful. "I've been waiting for your call. I am so deeply sorry about Ryan." I told him about the envelope. There was a long pause. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" he said. "There's a great deal I need to show you." Frank's office was in a 2-story brick building on Marymount Avenue that had been there since the 70s and looked it, which I had always found reassuring. His secretary, a woman named Paulette who had known our family for decades, squeezed my arm on the way in and didn't try to fill the silence with anything. Frank stood when I entered and we shook hands the old way, firmly, with eye contact. He sat me down across from his desk and opened a manila folder on top of a larger file. "About 5 months ago," he said, "Ryan came to see me. He was composed but troubled. He told me that his marriage had deteriorated and that he had serious concerns about what might happen to you if he wasn't around to intervene. He asked me to prepare a new deed transferring the property back into your name alone." I couldn't speak for a moment. "He had already consulted with a colleague about divorce proceedings," Frank continued. "He was gathering documentation. But before he moved forward with any of that, he wanted to be certain you were protected regardless of what came next. He was very clear about that. You first, everything else after." Frank slid the deed across the desk. It was notarized, witnessed, dated 5 months prior. The house on Ridgecrest Road was mine again, without qualification, without condition. "He left something else," Frank said. He was quiet for a moment before he reached into the lower drawer and produced a small, padded envelope. "He said to give it to you only in person, only if something happened to him before he could talk to you himself." Inside the envelope was a USB drive and a handwritten note in Ryan's careful print. The note said only, "Watch this first." Then the drive. "I love you, Dad." Frank turned his monitor toward me, and I sat in that office chair with my hands folded in my lap and watched my son's face appear on the screen. Ryan looked tired but composed, the way he looked at the end of a long project that had finally been finished. He sat at what appeared to be his desk at work, door closed, voice low. "Dad," he said, "if you're watching this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry I couldn't tell you all of this in person. I tried to find the right moment and I kept telling myself there would be more time. That was my mistake." He cleared his throat. "I signed the house back to you because I realized what I should have understood from the beginning. Cassandra didn't marry me because she loved me. I know that's hard to say out loud, but I've had months to sit with it and I know it's true." He was quiet for a moment. "I found out about 8 months ago that she had been in a relationship with a man named Donovan Marsh for at least a year before she ended things with me. Maybe longer. I also found out that she had moved money from our joint accounts into an LLC she registered in Donovan's name without telling me. We're talking about a significant amount." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I know I should have told you sooner. I didn't want to worry you. You'd already been through so much with Mom. I wanted to have everything sorted before I brought it to you. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorry." His expression softened. "The house is yours, Dad. Frank has the deed. There's nothing she can do about it legally, and I made sure of that. I had a full medical evaluation the same day I signed it. Frank insisted on it himself, and he was right to. Whatever she tries, the paperwork is clean." He leaned slightly closer to the camera. "I'm sorry for everything you're carrying. I hope you fight for it. The house is part of you and it's part of Mom, and I'm not going to let her have it." The video ended. I sat with my hands still folded and said nothing for a long time. Frank gave me the USB drive and a certified copy of the deed, and we agreed he would represent me if it came to that. He walked me to the door and told me to call him the moment anything happened. I told him about Cassandra's 2-week deadline. He said, "She doesn't know about the deed yet?" "She has no idea," I said. "Good," he said. "Let's keep it that way for now." That evening, I drove home and found Cassandra in the living room with her laptop open and a glass of wine, reviewing what appeared to be listings for retirement apartments. She looked up when I came in. "Have you started thinking about which areas you'd prefer?" she said. "I can send you the links I've been looking at." I sat down in the armchair across from her and opened the folder on my lap and set the deed on the coffee table between us. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "The house is mine." She set down her wine glass and picked up the papers. I watched her read them. I watched her face move through confusion, then disbelief, then something colder and harder than either. "This isn't real," she said. "He would have told me." "He chose not to tell you," I said. "He explains why in the video he left with Frank. He knew exactly what he was doing and exactly why." She set the papers down very carefully. "You're lying. You forged this after he died." "It was notarized 5 months ago," I said. "Frank has the originals. Ryan had a full medical evaluation the same day to document his competency. There's nothing to challenge." She stood up. The wine glass nearly toppled. She grabbed the deed and held it like she was thinking about tearing it, then stopped herself. Her eyes were bright with something I didn't have a name for. "You think you've won something," she said. "You haven't. I will fight this in every court available to me, and I will make sure everyone in this town knows what kind of man manipulates his grieving son into signing away property." She walked out of the room. I heard her go upstairs, then heard the muffled sound of a phone call, her voice sharp and low. Then the front door opened and closed and her car pulled out of the driveway. The phone calls started the following day. Neighbors. Old colleagues from my contracting days. A woman from Carol's book club who had known me for 15 years. Everyone repeating some version of the same story, that I had pressured a grieving, depressed Ryan into signing over the deed, that I had taken advantage of his emotional state. One woman told me Cassandra had been speaking at the community center about elder financial abuse and was handing out pamphlets with my name referenced in the margin. I called Frank and told him everything. "Expected," he said. "She's trying to poison the well before this goes to court. We need to move quickly. I want to speak with Ryan's colleague, the one he was close to. Do you have a contact?" I did. His name was Marcus Webb, a project manager at Ryan's firm who had known my son for 6 years. Ryan had mentioned him often, always with a kind of easy affection that told me this was someone he actually trusted. I found the number in Ryan's contacts on his laptop, which I had kept charged and locked in my workshop since the funeral. Marcus answered on the 3rd try, and when I explained who I was, his voice shifted into something careful and warm. "Mr. Greer, I am so sorry. Ryan was one of the best people I have ever worked with." I told him what was happening. I told him I needed to know what Ryan had told him in those last months. There was a long pause. Then he said, "He talked to me about it. He talked to me a lot, actually, toward the end. He told me about Donovan, about the money. He said he felt like an idiot for missing the signs, and I told him that wasn't what it made him. He was just someone who loved someone who didn't deserve it." "Did he tell you about the house?" "Yes. I actually tried to talk him out of transferring it until after the divorce was finalized. Told him to wait. He said he couldn't. He said he needed to know his father was safe before anything else happened. Those were almost exactly his words." "If it came to it," I asked, "would you be willing to say that in court?" "Without hesitation," Marcus said. "Ryan was my friend. Whatever he needed from me, it's the same answer now." The letter from Cassandra's attorney arrived 4 days later. The firm was based in Asheville, well known according to Frank, and the suit alleged that Ryan had been in a state of significant emotional distress at the time of signing, that he had been under the influence of medication for anxiety that impaired his judgment. and that he had been subjected to undue influence by a manipulative and controlling father. I read the words medication for anxiety and felt something close to fury move through me. Ryan had never taken medication for anxiety. He had never been treated for any psychological condition. He was my son, and I knew his medical history the way I knew every joint in the house I had built. Frank told me to bring him everything I could find. I went back to Ryan's office, and this time I went through it systematically, the way I used to go through a construction site before a final inspection. In the bottom drawer of his desk, behind a hanging file folder, I found a slim leather notebook, dark green, the kind with an elastic band to close it. I sat on the floor of Ryan's office and read it for 2 hours. The early entries were from about 14 months before he died. Work notes, project timelines, a few observations about the neighborhood and about the garden that Carol had planted in the backyard, which Ryan had quietly maintained after she was gone without ever mentioning it to me. Then the tone shifted around the 10-month mark. Entries about money going missing from the joint account. About a name, Donovan, appearing on a bank statement in a way that didn't make sense. About an afternoon when Ryan came home early from work and found a number he didn't recognize in Cassandra's recent calls and found it registered to a Donovan Marsh, life and wellness consultant, operating out of Black Mountain. She denied it, Ryan wrote, called me paranoid, said Donovan was a professional contact, and that my insecurity was the real problem in the marriage. But I saw the texts, I saw the timestamps. Further on, had it out tonight. She went cold the way she goes cold when she's calculated that emotion won't work anymore. Told me I was welcome to speak to an attorney if I felt that way. Like it was a business negotiation, like we were talking about a contract dispute. And near the end, written in handwriting slightly more compressed than the earlier entries, as if the pen were trying to conserve space, I signed the house back to Dad today. Frank was thorough. He made me get a full physical and a cognitive eval first, which I appreciated. I feel better than I have in months. Whatever happens next, Dad is safe. That's the part I can control. There was also a USB drive in a small sleeve taped to the inside back cover. On it were screenshots of text conversations, bank wire confirmations, photographs of Cassandra and Donovan at what appeared to be a retreat center in Waynesville, and 2 audio files. I listened to the first one with the volume low. Cassandra's voice, clear and specific. The property is in his name, which is the only problem, but Ryan's not well. He's not sleeping. He's anxious. If something changes, the house reverts to me and then we move forward the way we planned. A man's voice, presumably Donovan. And if he challenges it, he's 68 and he lives alone, Cassandra said. He won't have the energy for a fight. I closed the laptop. Frank said, bring him everything. I drove to his office the next morning with the notebook, the USB drive, and every printed document I could find in Ryan's desk. Frank spread it all across his conference table and sat with his reading glasses on for 40 minutes while I drank bad coffee and looked at the mountain view from his window. This is comprehensive, he finally said. Ryan was thorough. He had a good mind and he used it. Is it enough? Frank took off his glasses. More than enough. But I want you to be prepared for a difficult few weeks before the hearing. She's going to push hard right up until she runs out of road. He also said, quietly, that given the audio recording, he thought it was worth contacting the district attorney's office about the financial transfers. That was a separate matter from the civil suit, he said, but it was not a matter to ignore. A week before the hearing, Frank called me at 7 in the evening. Walter, he said, I need you to do something this week. Install cameras in the house, inside and out, motion activated, cloud backup. Can you do that? I told him I'd built houses for 40 years and I thought I could manage a security system. Good. And take the notebook and the USB drive with you whenever you leave the property. Don't leave the originals at home. I asked him why. Because she knows what we have and she hasn't seen it in the courtroom yet, he said. Desperation makes people careless. I installed the cameras on a Thursday. 4 of them, front door, back door. the hallway outside Ryan's office, and the workshop, which shared a wall with the house. I connected them to my phone and spent an evening making sure each angle was right. On Sunday, I drove to Frank's office to go over final preparations. I was careful to bring the notebook and drive with me in my jacket pocket. Cassandra had been staying elsewhere most of the week, coming back only to collect things from the bedroom, always while I was home, always silent, always measuring. I was 40 minutes into the meeting when my phone buzzed. Motion detected, back door. I opened the app and there she was, Cassandra, in a dark jacket, crouched at the back door with something thin in her hand working at the lock. Frank watched over my shoulder without a word. I called the police from his conference table, stated the address and the situation clearly, and then sat and watched the app while Frank called his own contact at the department. The camera inside the hallway picked her up 2 minutes after she got the lock open. She went straight to Ryan's office without pausing. She moved through the room fast and without care. Drawers open, papers thrown, the small cabinet pulled away from the wall. She was looking for the notebook. She was looking for the drive. She was still in the office when the patrol unit arrived. I watched the officers approach the back of the house. I watched the light go on inside. I drove home and got there while she was still being walked to the car in handcuffs, her face a careful arrangement of injured indignation that fell apart slightly when she saw me. She was charged that night with breaking and entering and tampering with evidence in a pending civil proceeding. Frank told me later that the district attorney's office had already been in contact about the financial transfers and that those conversations had accelerated considerably. The hearing was on a clear October morning. The courtroom was fuller than I expected for a civil proceeding. Neighbors, some of Ryan's former colleagues, Frank's wife, Paulette, from the office. I sat in my one good suit and kept my hands flat on my knees. Cassandra's attorneys opened with the version of events I had already heard. A fragile, medicated young man manipulated by an overbearing father. They presented 2 witnesses, an acquaintance of Cassandra's who testified that Ryan had seemed withdrawn and pressured, and a man from the community center who said he had heard Ryan describe his relationship with me as difficult. When it was Frank's turn, he called Ryan's physician first, Dr. Helen Okafor had treated Ryan since he moved back to the Asheville area 5 years earlier. She was direct and precise under questioning. Ryan had been in excellent physical and mental health at his last examination. He had never been prescribed anxiolytics or any psychotropic medication. She had conducted a formal competency evaluation at his request approximately 5 months before his death and had found him to be entirely capable of making informed legal decisions. She had documented this evaluation thoroughly and retained her own copy. Cassandra's attorney had little traction on cross-examination and gave up after 4 questions. Marcus Webb took the stand next and testified calmly and without flourish. He described what Ryan had told him about the infidelity and the financial transfers. He described Ryan's deliberate process of gathering evidence, consulting attorneys, and transferring the property. He described Ryan's words almost exactly as he had told them to me. "I need to know my father is safe before anything else happens." There was quiet in the courtroom while Marcus said it. Frank introduced the notebook as evidence. He introduced the USB drive and played a portion of the audio recording, only enough to establish Cassandra's awareness of the property and her stated intentions regarding it. He introduced the surveillance footage from the break-in without narration. The courtroom watched Cassandra move through the hallway of a house that was no longer hers, looking for something that was no longer there. Cassandra's attorneys asked for a recess. It lasted 22 minutes. When they returned, the lead attorney announced that his client wished to withdraw the suit. The judge, a methodical woman named Carver who had shown no expression through any of it, asked Cassandra directly whether she understood what she was withdrawing and whether it was voluntary. Cassandra said yes. She said it to the table in front of her. Judge Carver issued the ruling. The deed was valid. The house on Ridgecrest Road belonged to Walter Greer without qualification or encumbrance. Court costs were assessed against the plaintiff. She also noted for the record that the evidence presented would be referred to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal matters separate from these proceedings. Cassandra left through the side door without looking at me. Frank put a hand on my shoulder and said, "It's done, Walter." I nodded. It was done. It didn't feel the way I had imagined it would feel. It felt like standing in a room after a storm had passed through and looking at what was still standing. Outside, Marcus Webb shook my hand and said Ryan would have been glad. A few neighbors came over and said things I received gratefully without quite hearing. Dr. Okafor found me by the doors and told me that Ryan had been one of her favorite patients and that she was glad the truth had been protected. 6 months later, Cassandra pleaded guilty to 1 count of financial fraud in a separate proceeding. The transfers to Donovan Marsh's LLC amounted to over $60,000 from the joint account over an 18-month period. She received probation, full restitution, and a fine. Frank told me about it by phone on a Tuesday afternoon, and I sat in the workshop for a long time after we hung up. The house was quiet that winter in a different way than it had been quiet before. Not hollow, just calm. I started going through Ryan's things slowly, a drawer at a time, on days when I had the energy for it. I found his old baseball mitt in the back of his closet. I found 3 unfinished sketches of the Ridgecrest Road house that he'd apparently been making from the back porch, the mountain view behind the roofline. I found a note tucked into his copy of a favorite book that just said, "Tell Dad about the Japanese joinery he'd want to know." I did know about Japanese joinery. I had always known about it, but I would have loved to have been told. I had been rolling an idea around for several months by then, something that had started as a vague thought and become something more specific. The workshop out back was larger than anything I needed for my own projects. Carol and I had always talked about doing something with the extra space. Ryan had mentioned once that a lot of the veterans in Buncombe County had trouble finding vocational programs that were practical rather than just supervised busy work. I called a woman I knew who ran a veteran support program out of the VA clinic and described what I had in mind. A small woodworking and repair program, Saturdays, open to veterans and to young men and women from the community college who needed hands-on trade hours, basic joinery, furniture restoration, basic construction math, nothing certified, just real work with real materials. She called me back 2 days later and said she had 3 names already. The first one who showed up was a young man named Anthony, 24, who had done 2 tours in Afghanistan and was now studying construction management at the college on the GI Bill. He was quiet and moved carefully, the way people move when they're paying close attention. I put a chisel in his hand and showed him the correct grip, and he listened the way Ryan used to listen, fully, without any part of his attention somewhere else. By spring, there were 6 regulars. We worked on Saturdays from 9 until noon and sometimes later if something interesting was happening with a project. I made coffee. Sometimes someone brought pastry. We didn't talk much except about the work, which is the best kind of talking anyway. I went to Ryan's grave on a Saturday in April after the session, still in my workshop clothes, hands smelling of linseed oil and pine. I brought wildflowers from the field at the back of the property, the kind Carol always preferred to cut flowers. I stood there for a while before I said anything. "The house is still standing," I told him. "I put new cedar planks on the porch last month. Your workshop is full of people on Saturday mornings. Anthony reminded me of you last week, the way he figures things out. He doesn't ask questions until he's thought it through first, and then the question is exactly the right one. The wind moved through the grass around the headstone the way wind moves through grass. I also want you to know that I found the note about Japanese joinery. I know you tucked it in there on purpose. You were always doing things like that, leaving things for me to find at the right time." I set the flowers against the stone and stood up straight. "You took care of me," I said. "You took care of everything. I know what that cost you to carry alone. I wish you had told me. I wish we'd had more time." I drove home through the mountains with the windows down, the April air cool and sharp off the ridgeline. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see the house the way you can sometimes see something you know completely as if it's the first time. The wraparound porch with the new cedar planks. The workshop windows with the lights still on from the morning session. The dogwood in the front yard that Carol planted the year Ryan started kindergarten, now 30 years old and full of white blossoms against the blue-gray mountain sky. I built that house with my hands and I raised my son in it, and I lost my wife in it and I nearly lost it too. But it was still standing, which meant something I didn't entirely have the words for, which was all right. Not everything that matters needs to be said out loud. I went inside and put the coffee on and opened the workshop doors to let the morning in, and I got to work.